Welcome to the Marvelous Middle Age Podcast, where we are building a community of people who are in the midst of midlife, sharing our stories and learning from each other along the way. Each week, I'll have a guest join me to discuss a topic that impacts our lives and touches on some aspect of midlife. We'll discuss relationships, transitions, health and well-being, parenting, careers, and more. My goal is to encourage and support you and help you thrive as you navigate this adventure of midlife. Join me here each week for the Marvelous Middle Age Podcast. This week on the Marvelous Middle Age Podcast, I'm speaking with Tom Brennom. Tom and his wife Pat have been married for 57 years, have 2 grown children and 4 grandchildren. He has served as a community volunteer since retiring from his engineering career. Tom cares for his wife, who has dementia. In this episode, Tom shares caregiving from a husband's perspective and how he has found fellowship and support through the men's caregiver coffee support groups he leads. He offers that there is still a lot of joy to be had in caregiving, even when circumstances are challenging. In this episode, Tom also provides a wealth of resources to help caregivers. Be sure to check out the show notes for a great reading list and more. Tom Brennom, welcome to the Marvelous Middle Age Podcast.
Happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy you're here as well. I feel like we already had our episode recording before we started talking. We were having such a fantastic conversation, and I thought, you know what, I need to hit record here because we're getting some good stuff, and I didn't want to lose any of it. So,
yeah, that's good.
Yes, that's a good thing. It's a good thing. Before we get started, though, could you just briefly introduce yourself, tell the listeners about who you are, your family, and what you do?
Sure. I grew up in Wisconsin. My wife and I grew up in the same little town. Went to school in Madison, engineering degree.
Yes.
And Collins was a kind of a far out place that didn't know anything about. And we came down in 1968, and my wife said, okay, if we're here 5 years, we're going to go back to Wisconsin. And here we are. And
the big metropolis of Cedar Rapids, right? I love that. I love it.
We've been married 57 years and have 2 children and 4 grandchildren. And I worked at Collins my career and have been retired for, it seems like almost forever, but it's a life after retirement as well. So
that's
life
right.
is good.
I love that. I love that. We have that Collins background in common, and we were just reminiscing about some people that we knew in common and what a fun time we had when we worked there.
Great place to work.
It was. It sure was. And that was fun talking about that. We could probably swap a lot of stories, but I'm so glad you're here. We had the privilege to have a person in common in our lives, Kathy Good from the Chris and Susie DeWolf Center, and she was generous enough to share your contact information with me because I was really wanting to include some personal stories from people who are in the midst of caregiving or have provided care to aging adults. And so she connected us, and you were, I was so thrilled when you said you would be a part of the podcast because I want to share your story and talk about your caregiving for your wife, and just share kind of what that experience, has been like for you. So can you just kind of share with the listeners your experience so far, kind of what has transpired with your wife and her caregiving situation and how all that kind of started?
Sure. Well, my wife, her mother died of Alzheimer's, and so it's a vivid memory in her mind of what that's like, and she thinks of the bad side and the loss of memory and loss of recognition and not even knowing your own kids and so on, and so she remembers that. And jump forward about probably 8 years ago, I could tell that there's memory issues going on. It wasn't cognitive thought issues as much as it was memory. forgetfulness and repeating the same question after giving an answer. And 6 years ago, she went through evaluation and was diagnosed with dementia, likely Alzheimer's, and still very high level functioning. And so it really didn't become a barrier at all. But she is still at home and doing well. It's a slow decline. Her memory has declined further to where short-term memory is terrible. Cognitive thinking is difficult, so discussions that we have is very limited. But about maybe 5 years ago, our friend invited me to join the men's caregivers coffee group. And at that time, it was twice a month for an hour down at the Mercy Caregiver Center. And I had not heard of it, but I was kind of on my own. I was doing whatever I thought necessary, thinking that the majority of the issues are the things you hear about rather than living it. And as I became more and more involved, I learned more and more that you can't do this alone, that there is tremendous resources available, but you need to get outside of your boundaries, especially when you haven't dealt with it before. So that's kind of the start. And Pat is still at home. This last weekend, we went to Madison for a meeting with some UW people, as well as a football game, and we had a wonderful weekend. And so you live the moment, and for this last weekend, it basically lasted all weekend, so which was wonderful.
Great. That's great. Creating those memories and just enjoying company with people and having fun, you know. And I think that's something that people kind of immediately think is over once someone has a whether it's any kind of a health issue, is like, well, you know, that's that. And it's like, well, no, there's still fun times to be had and memories to be made and enjoyment, you know,
absolutely.
As a couple, with friends.
Joy is available.
Absolutely. There can be absolutely joy, and you can have joy and be grieving things at the same time. And I think some people think you can't do that, and you can, absolutely. And it's okay. It's okay. You can give yourself permission, right, to do both simultaneously. So with Pat and her day to day and your day to day, what have been kind of some of the things you found to be especially challenging? And on the flip side, what have you found like, oh, okay, we've got this, we're doing well with this, and her kind of just your typical day to day?
Well, I think one of the things that is very significant is early on meaning maybe 4 years ago, the pandemic was hanging out there, which created its own problems. But slightly before that, I decided, you know, I if I'm going to be a 24/7 caregiver as time passes, that I need to get rid of my, if you will, calendar. I tend to be a community volunteer by nature. My cup is filled by helping other people. And so that included mission trips out of town. I'm a volunteer leader with 8 Days of Hope, which deals with natural disasters and rebuilding and cutting down trees and things like that. And what I found was that I'm just not going to have time. So I resigned different positions. I was one of the beginners, if you will, organizing the Collins group that builds handicap ramps for people. RAP, it's called.
Yes.
And I was on their board and so on. So I backed away from my personal commitments, thinking that I needed to become a 24/7 caregiver, therefore I should have time. And over the years, what I've found is that isn't really best for me. And what I had forgotten was that if I don't take care of myself, I can't take care of Pat well. And I say that not just the physical needs, but also the emotional needs and the stresses and all of that stuff. And so one of the things I've done in the last couple of years is try to get back into some caregiving at a different level. Not caregiving. I meant to say get back into volunteering. Right. And still do some of those things, just don't do them quite as fully, and I didn't travel anymore. A trip that I made to Louisiana after one of their hurricanes and flooding issues. Pat called after I was gone 3 days and said, "Where are you? You didn't tell me where you were going." And that really kind of hit the nail on the head that I cannot just, even if all the best intentions and communications and plans, and you can't leave.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you can't be gone for an hour or to backfill.
Sure.
So anyway, it's evolved to a point to where I'm busy, she's busy, life is good, and there's joy to be had, and I'm in control of her mood and emotions. And that is a big change, especially for men, to become in control of the emotions of somebody. That's not our thing.
We were talking about that a little bit before we recorded, or I hit the record button, if you will. You were a part of a caregiver support group at the Center on Aging and Dementia. And I was wondering if you could share a little more about the support group. It's for men specifically, which I would love to kind of dive into that a little bit more, because we were talking about that and what it means for men to be vulnerable and to share. And so can you share more about the support group, how it helps you, and why it's just been so important in your caregiving journey?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. In fact, I'm privileged to share it. It's interesting that we as men are not built and trained and nurtured in a way as we grew up to get into the soft things. We're go hard things, go put a roof on a building, or go shovel snow or something.
Yes, absolutely.
However, the group is, and I now co-facilitated with Rob Cook, is a men's coffee caregivers group. When I joined, we met, as I mentioned earlier, twice a month for an hour. We now have 2 groups. We meet weekly for an hour and a half, and we have a unbelievable group of men that love is the binder, I believe, and it's love for a spouse or a family member, mostly spouses, and the openness and the willing to share and the confidence and trust that is shown across that group. We typically will have in the group that I've helped facilitate 20 to 25 men each week.
Wow. Yeah.
And it is awesome the way that we learn from each other and support each other. Yeah. And there is a lot of available resources, whether they be books, whether they be classes given through the Caregiver Center to help educate us or to share. And this group of men is a tremendous support team for each other. And so in the end, I cannot imagine doing this alone and finding the methods that work and finding techniques that might help and dealing with some of the issues that may or may not happen to you but have happened to others, where we look for common solutions, which for some things works, and we find resources for others that aren't common and deal with that. So it is a extremely close psychological family group. We could just as well be brothers.
Oh, I love that.
In the way it works.
Gosh. Well, and I believe when Kathy was giving me the tour of the center, you have the ability to bring folks in virtually as well. So if they don't live, I think you said you had one gentleman who's in Nairobi,
right,
for a time, or was still in it.
He lives there.
He lives in Nairobi, and he can
get up in the middle of the night and join our Zoom call.
That's amazing. And so I think that's what really struck me too, is that you've made it accessible for people to be a part of it, and for guys to join in either in person or virtually, which is so important. Now we're all, Zoom experts because of the pandemic, or we're experts at these virtual technologies now. And I think that's great. But one of the other things that you said was when you were talking about the frequency of how often the group meets and how many people are in it, the need that's there for men to get together and to share, and that you've really become bonded and like a family.
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And in fact, I will get text or an email or a call that say, "Hey, I can't make it Tuesday." So
wow.
That's the commitment that each of us, I think, feel that we're not just listening. We're just
Right.
not putting time in. We're actually all feel that we're gaining
Right.
by participating. It's a wonderful way to support and find ways to support, because there are some simple things that we all tend to do. We run out of patience.
Sure.
So we're always praying for patience.
Yeah.
We don't argue. That's the number one on our top 10 list. Don't argue. And you're amazed at how many ways you can create an argument by just making a statement.
Right.
And so
Right.
all of those things, sometimes we laugh about it. Humor is an important part.
Yes, it is.
But we laugh in support and love, not laugh in making fun of.
Right, right. And there's no judgment, right? So if you were to come into a support group meeting and you'd had a rough week and you just needed to get it out, you probably feel 100% comfortable to say, man, this happened this week. I am feeling A, B, and C about it. And the guys would not judge you. They wouldn't critique or criticize you. They'd probably try to support you, uplift you, pray for you, and all of the above. And you're going to come to a place that you're going to not be judged and that you're going to be supported. And that is huge in terms of a situation like this. You mentioned earlier about taking care of yourself. And I put my hand up in the air and said, hallelujah, because taking care of yourself and all this is so important. And I feel like this support group is a component of your own self-care that you're doing, which is huge. Yeah.
Yeah, and a couple of numbers that sit out there. They're generalizations. A third of us as caregivers are in worse physical shape than the people we're taking care of. And a third of us as caregivers will likely pass before the person we're taking care of.
Wow.
And so that just kind of puts the exclamation point on taking care of yourself first, just like the story goes, putting on your own oxygen mask in an airplane first before your children. What can you do when you're not prepared, when you're not capable, when you're worn out, when you're stressed? How are you going to deal with mood control, and how are you going to deal with loving care when you're already at your wit's end?
Right. When you're depleted, you can't, that saying kind of similar, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? And so when you're in the midst of caregiving and you're not practicing good self-care, it catches up to you quickly. Those statistics are staggering, and I can absolutely see that. That's one of the impacts of caregiving that I don't think a lot of people talk about, is the impact to the health and stress of the caregiver and what that does. And that's one of the many reasons why I wanted to do this series, was because for those of us who maybe aren't in that situation yet, we need to start thinking about this and preparing for it. And for those that are, it just needs to be reiterated. And it's okay. You need to give yourself permission to take care of yourself and do it. And even if it's something, I think a lot of people think it's big, overwhelming things. No, it might just be get outside for a walk for 10 minutes, drink some more water, go to a support group if you can make arrangements for that. It doesn't have to be this big, massive thing. Get a preventive exam, go to your doctor and get some updated blood work if you haven't done that in a while. Things like that can help you, just do that for yourself, because you're worth doing it for. The person you're caring for needs you at your best. It's just super important.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, and it's something that truly comes forth through the caregiver centers, and that is that there are resources available. There are classes. Guilt is an issue, and if somebody brings up guilt in our discussions, we will also find a resource to how can you reduce guilt? How can you reduce that feeling of guilt? Because guilt, it's there, and you feel like you can never do enough. Well, one of the things we talk about is perfection is not possible.
Yes.
You cannot be perfect, but you can be very good. You can have excellence. You can improve from the previous day, but that doesn't mean you can become perfect. And caregiving is not a perfect thing. It's very experiential, where you're responding to the situation, and then how do you respond? And there's a number of classes that are given, and one of the things that people probably don't realize is how much of this training and education and classwork, there is no fee.
Right.
And
a lot
so
of it is
it's
no
a time,
cost.
your commitment is time, and what an opportunity. It's just tremendous that you can have these available right here, rather than doing something online and you can't really talk to the people or whoever is presenting or
Right.
or supporting.
It's nice. I will put a link in the show notes to the schedule out at the Caregivers Center to make sure people have access to that. So if you're looking at attending a course, support group, what have you, they have a wonderful calendar of events out there that really is jam-packed, to your point, with things. When I was actually getting my tour with Kathy, we happened to be walking into the end of a session where it was the caregiver and the care receiver together, just sharing some fun time, having some cookies and coffee, doing a craft together. And I think that's important too, as we were talking earlier, that there's still so many things that you can do with your care receiver that bring joy and excitement and happiness, even in the midst of maybe what could be a tough caregiving situation. And for you as the care provider, there's a lot out there for you. And I think if anything we can hopefully do with this podcast series is to make people aware of resources. Because I think, that feeling of isolation and just not even knowing where to start and kind of being paralyzed with that, if they could just join in one thing, the web of connection will start, and that will help them tremendously.
No, absolutely. And for instance, you say, I'd like to read some books because there's some low cognitive performance or maybe some early stages of dementia showing up. I'll go read a book. Well, you go, I don't care if you go to Barnes & Noble or if you go to secondhand books, wherever you go, there's a lot of books out there.
Yep.
And if you would come to, for instance, our meeting, you'd find out there is a small handful of books that are tremendously helpful.
Right.
We have found that one of those books is written by Judy Cornish, who used to be a lawyer, a senior law person, but is passionate about taking care of people with dementia. And she has developed a method, and it's called DAWN, D-A-W-N, Dementia and Alzheimer's Wellness Network, of how do you take care of somebody and keep them in the home, because care centers are not low-cost opportunities.
Right.
It's not
it can be costly,
Motel 8.
Right. There's a premium price to some of those services. Yeah.
And providing the things that give, I'll talk about bringing joy to a person. There is joy to be had for caregivers as well as care receivers. Absolutely. And her method is tremendous. Then there's we call it the Joy Book. It's Moments of Joy, written by a gal named Jolene Brackey, that it's broken into sections like how do you take the keys away from somebody? And how do you deal with that trauma of that situation? And she talks about that in just a couple of pages, some advice and some experiential opportunities. There is Alan Power, who has been at Mercy Hospital a number of times helping formulate how should the village be developed and provide not only better care, but making more joy. And some of the things he has promoted, they have actually reduced medications on patients. They've got feedback of more enjoyment going on.
That's really important.
And so there are tools, and this stuff I won't say is general knowledge, but within the group we talk about these kinds of things, and so it can help you go down. And when you pick that book out, don't just pick any old book out. It sounds like an interesting story.
Right. Get
one that is already, if you will, the top 10 list of how you can improve your ability to become a better caregiver.
I love that. And the recommendations of the books and the resources from people who are using them and have found benefit from them, I think is important, because you're right. You can go to any bookstore and go to caregiving or dementia or Alzheimer's or any of those topics and see a myriad of books, but it's how, again, caregivers' time is at a premium a lot of times. What are the ones that really have good tools and tips and information to make the best use of the time that you're going to spend? I will link all of those that you just mentioned in the show notes so people can click and order them or get their hands on them. And I know that the Caregivers Center out there has a library too of books and can make recommendations, which is just, again, amazing. If you were to meet a new person who is starting in this journey, you reflected back on how things started with your wife, what advice or guidance would you have for someone who is either currently in it or kind of is seeing caregiving maybe coming down the road? They're starting to notice some things, or they're thinking that some things are happening. Is there anything specifically that you would want them to know or to share with them?
Well, I think probably number one, and I would have not thought of this as number one 6 years ago, is you're not alone, and don't try to do it alone. Right. It's commonplace for men to have this attitude, I can do anything. Oh, caregiving? What's the problem? Right. I can do that.
I got this.
Yeah, I got this because people depend on me. I'm
right.
I'm the head of
shoulders.
the family, right? I'm capable. Big mistake, because what happens is that it isn't just physical things. It isn't just arranging things. It isn't just keeping the pills organized. There is emotional stress. There is next steps. There is things that are distasteful, that are very personal. If you get into incontinence issues or other things. And how are you managing the healthcare team if you're the primary caregiver and you're not trained and you're not experienced? Very, very difficult. So you're not alone. And there is an abundance of help, one-on-one counseling and one-on-one discussions, not just counseling. It makes it sound like it's a formal,
like a therapy thing.
Bad thing, yeah.
Not that that's bad, but
no,
yeah, I get what you're saying.
One-on-one discussions of the situation. You say, I think I'm going to have to move into a care center because of this. Where do I start? How do I know a good one from a bad one, et cetera? But that is available. But where do I go from here? Which would be the beginning. The other is, where do I find information to help me? There's a comprehensive planning guide that has been developed at the Innovation Care Center. And I think it's around 160 pages now, and it's growing. And it's good stuff.
Oh, it's great stuff.
It isn't just the will. There are other important documents to deal with. So there's a lot of that available. Which books do I read? Where do I talk to somebody? And when you get involved in some of these groups, I think you become lifelong friendship development as well as support for your personal need. I've got some great friends that I've never known before the Caregiver Center that I value. And I think I'm typical. I don't think I'm different than anybody else in those groups. The other is, one of the surprising things to me is that I am really controlling my wife's mood. And that's a huge tenet of what Judy Cornish's book, Dementia with Dignity, which is the one that she's written 2 books. That's the one that I use as a guide. And in fact, several of us have actually been certified as Dawn certified people of understanding the method and the tools. But mood control is huge. And to think that when my wife is not having a positive thought and it's very negative, that I am one that is likely instigating her to be in that bad mood because I'm controlling her mood because she can't control her mood. That is a huge one that I would have never thought of.
Right, yeah. I would have not either.
And another piece of that is, if you look at the tools of the Dawn method, 3 of the 7 tools that are discussed relate to security and trust. And so you knew if you're married, you knew, you're taking care, you're trusted taking care of your spouse. What you didn't realize is how critical that is, because that becomes a major item during dementia and loss of cognitive thinking and memory. So those are the kind of things that I would say, as a result, come and join us into a discussion group and just listen. See if this might not help you, because I think there's a lot of things going on that aren't particularly complicated on the surface, but are very deep, and it comes out. And so I think you'll come back if you do.
And I think when you learn that, as you have, and understood it and practiced the tools and the awareness that you have now of, the way I'm maybe saying this or my mood or how I'm approaching a situation is directly impacting her, there are things I can do, take a little bit of that, like I do have some information and control here. I can help the situation practicing some very, simple, practical things to help this. And, most of us don't know that. Like we just, if we have a family member with dementia, it's just not something that everybody talks about and knows. And so to understand these things that can really help you, that can help your care receiver as well. That's powerful. That's really powerful.
It really is. And the other big thing is don't focus on what they can't do.
Right.
Focus on what they can do. Focus on the positive. And there is joy. And I mentioned this in the beginning. Really looking for is joy. And there is joy to be had. And the little surprise, I think, to me, is the joy that comes to the caregiver that is a result of focusing on bringing purpose and joy to the person receiving care. You grow as well. And so it becomes a win-win, and it's hard to beat win-wins.
Absolutely. When you're both experiencing that and together too, I think in a marriage relationship especially, I think it's important because it's easy. It would be very easy to reflect on what was and what we used to be able to do, or she used to be able to do this, or we used to be able to do that. And to say now, hey, here are things now we can still do together. We can take fun trips for the weekend. We can still do things in the community together, whatever that looks like for you. That's huge for the caregiver. And because it would be so easy to focus on the other side of the equation. And so I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I think that's our natural tendency, right? Is to focus on everything you've lost, know?
And it is not a curse of death.
No.
It is just a phase of life that may be not your choice,
right?
But you can still make the most out of it. And I think life is still good.
Yeah.
And keeping somebody in the home, I think there's no question in my mind that caregivers that participate in a social group of sharing, that is the best caregiving you could give your wife.
Right.
It is not having her join and putting her into a caregiving facility, because how do you get the personalized care?
Right.
You get it from the spouse, I believe, and that's where we're going, and especially for those that say, I just don't know what to do. Well, what you may find out is through some education and some sharing, you may find out maybe it's all right here and it's not that far away. I don't have to think about how am I going to ever afford to deal with a care center. Right.
You can learn some tools and tips and things to help you so that you can provide the level of care that you want and like you said, there are also supports and resources that can come in to help you with that. So you aren't alone. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, especially when you think about men as caregivers. And because like you said, guys aren't always taught to be the nurturing, gentle,
very
soft guys, right? They're taught to kind of be the leader and the head and the doer, as opposed to, hey, and I need to be vulnerable here and share. And, again, that support group sounds like it's just been such a lifeline for you and for so many others. And so if you're listening to this and of a gentleman who might benefit from this, I will link the caregiver support group information in the show notes to suggest to him. And that first suggestion, he may not, might be like, no, I'm good. I got it. I don't need this, but don't give up, because I think per Tom's strong recommendation, it can really be helpful.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Well, Tom, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Thank you so much for sharing. I know that there are going to be people who listen to this episode and are going to be blessed. And so thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for giving me the chance.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Take care. Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
If you're enjoying the podcast, please follow the show to make sure the latest episode is on your podcast feed each week. I would greatly appreciate a rating and a 5-star review on the podcast platform you're listening on. It helps others to find the show. If there are topics you'd like me to discuss on the show, please email me at themarvelousmiddleagepodcast@gmail.com or direct message me on Instagram at Nicole Stute. Thank you for listening.